Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpIndia podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us, the founder of Wikipedia, Larry Sanger. Thank you for joining us, sir. There are so many questions that we are dying to ask you.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, let's start with so, you are the founder of Wikipedia. Can you please tell us how it all started and what was your role in establishing Wikipedia?
Well, I guess I could tell a bit of the origin story. Um, I was circulating an idea for a website that I had to a number of acquaintances back in early 2000. And one of those acquaintances was Jimmy Wales. I had known him since about 1994 online, and then a couple of times I met him offline. And he responded to my surprise by basically offering me a job. How would you like to start an encyclopedia? Which I thought sounded pretty cool. It didn't pay very much. So he was quite a tightwad, actually. But he did give me full creative liberty, though. Didn't seem to like to be consulted that much about very much. And so I actually negotiated quite a bit with the volunteers, and we set up a system that was much too complicated and slow for the domain name that Jimmy Wales had already registered, called newpedia.com. And then we worked on that for a year, and it was going very slow. And even by the late summer and fall of that first year in 2000, we knew, and I certainly regarded it as a problem to be solved, that there just weren't enough people participating actively. We were getting a lot of interest. We had at the end of the first year, we had 2,000 people on the mailing list who were interested in contributing to a free encyclopedia, which was great. But there were only, I don't know, a few, over 100 to 200 active participants. Definitely not enough. And I think that was due to the difficulty of the system. And then we looked for a new content stream that ordinary people could much more easily participate in. So on January 2nd, 2001, I was having a dinner at a Mexican restaurant with a friend of mine. He was telling me about wikis. Wikis had been around since 1995, quite a few years before Wikipedia, as it happens. And basically a wiki, the very first wiki was called the WikiWeb, the Portland pattern repository of software patterns, basically. So it's very geeky. And then from there, a bunch of other wikis had developed, and there was a whole wiki culture, right? And he told me about this, and he said that wikis are very resilient. You would think that if anybody could edit any page and instantly, change anything on any page, and have it instantly accepted with no permission, that it would just be a mess. It'd just be a lot of vandalism, and somebody would come in and just erase everything. But that doesn't happen. And in fact, there's software features in more sophisticated wikis that prevent that from happening. So I was convinced well enough to try. So I thought, okay, yeah, let's try this. So I went home that very evening and sat down and wrote a one-page proposal to Jimmy Wales, install the wiki software, and I'll put it together, and maybe this will be one of those content streams that we're looking for Nupedia. Now, the people behind Nupedia, the advisory committee, as it was called, that was mostly PhD academics, the editors and the reviewers. They just didn't want to have anything to do with a wiki. They just basically, from the hearing of what it was, they said that was just ridiculous. And so I came up with another domain name called Wikipedia. I actually invented a lot of the basic, jargon and policies of Wikipedia in the first year. And we launched Wikipedia under its own domain name July 15th, just 2 weeks later.
So you
That's
were the person. You were the person who actually got Wikipedia rolling. You were the person who coded and got the website up, and formed the policy on how Wikipedia should function.
so. Yeah, I worked with the volunteers on the policy. I try to be quite accurate. It was my job really to formulate, to regularize the policy, to state it reasonably precisely, and also to try to enforce it in the first year. If I had not done that, then of course just words on a screen would not have any effect. So yeah,
Yeah.
that I
So
should
how
have.
did that happen? So how did Jimmy Wales simply, up and deny that you were the one who actually came up with Wikipedia?
Yeah, it's strange. My name was on the first 3 press releases, which he did. I think I helped draft the first one. I had nothing to do with the second 2 after that. But he released all 3 and obviously approved them. In all 3, I was credited as co-founder. He is actually on the record in a few different places, basically saying it was my idea. I've collected all this evidence on a page on larrysanger.org just to put it to rest. And because it's been out there for so many years, now basically Jimmy Wales has shut up about this. He doesn't make these claims denying that I'm co-founder anymore. At least he probably does privately, but he doesn't publicly anymore because he can't. It's just too ridiculous.
So why did this start? Why was Jimmy Wales initially denying that you were in fact, excuse me, the person who came up with Wikipedia, that you were in fact the founder?
I think the main reason is simply that I was an employee, and he wanted all the credit to himself, I guess. You'd have to ask him. I never did really.
I don't
I've
think
never
Jimmy
been
Wales
able
is
to
the one.
understand it precisely, except that if he's able to claim that he is the sole founder, obviously that gives his role in the community and in broader society much greater prominence. So, and because I've basically washed my hands of it entirely, I don't care that much. When people ask me, I will tell them, yes, I'm co-founder, and yes, he's being ridiculous. But I don't care. It's not something I go out of my way to say anymore too much. When he was repeatedly, like back in 2005, he actually started denying that I'm co-founder. And there was a period from between like 2005 to 2008 in which he was constantly basically saying this, and people, and it was weird. But now it's just common knowledge, and he seems to have dropped it. So.
That's very interesting. That actually gives us a window into Mr. Wales's personality. because denying the rightful place of somebody who is in fact the founder of Wikipedia, who put together the page, is a slightly low thing to do. So what was your reaction at the time? Of course, now you're saying that you've gotten over it and it's not really something that bothers you. But at the time, you presumably spent months and years putting this online encyclopedia together, because encyclopedias like Britannica, etc., were not putting their content online. So this was supposed to be something that would help the society generate and consume information, and you are the one who put that together. So at the
Yes.
time, what was your reaction, and what did you really feel about Jimmy Wales simply denying you the credit?
I'm sorry. So what's the question exactly?
I'm saying at the time, what did
Yes.
you really feel about Jimmy Wales denying you the credit? And, how did you go about trying to rectify it? Of course, now you have it on your website, but at the time, what was your reaction?
Oh, well, I mean, initially it was disbelief. It's like, what? Why would he deny something that is so well publicly documented? And it just seemed delusional. So it was, um, yeah, I don't really want to say too much more about it than I already have,
Uh, so,
because I mean,
yeah.
then it starts making me sound petty, and I don't, like I said, I'm long over it. I don't dwell on it anymore. I mean, I call myself the ex-founder of Wikipedia. I actually am more of a critic now
Right.
than um, somebody who wants to take credit for it.
So, okay, let's move on to how Wikipedia really functions. So, at the time, uh, the intention was to basically put together a website where anybody could add information. And because there was not a lot of information that encyclopedias like Britannica, etc., were putting online.
Mhm.
However, was there any consideration on how the checks and balances would work? Because when you have a platform where anybody can really input information, you run a great risk of that information being heavily biased. So at the time, what was your idea of the checks and balances that could be put into place?
Well, initially, the way that it was going to work, and I'm not saying that it should have worked or anything, that we could have made that work, but the initial vision, this is just to answer your question, um, is that Newpedia and Wikipedia were going to work together as a team, essentially. So Wikipedia was going to start the articles, and then they would go into an editorial process on Newpedia and be published by Newpedia. And well, basically, after I started Wikipedia, I turned 80 to 90% of my attention to Wikipedia. I'd still, from time to time, I'd put in a substantive effort into Newpedia, particularly ways to get Newpedia to work with Wikipedia in that, well, that was 2001 when this was happening. And the idea was that ultimately, as Wikipedia grew, so would Newpedia. Um, Later on, after I left Wikipedia, and I left Wikipedia initially just because they lost the ability to pay me, that basically all their ad revenue disappeared. So they had to lay off all their new hires. That included me. They means Bomis. That's the parent company of Newpedia and Wikipedia. Um, and so in 2002, after I had been away for a while, I said, well, at least what we should do is have a review process, just a stamp of approval, or maybe in a rating process for the articles that could be staffed by, credible experts, determined however, right? Whatever a rational way of determining a credible expert would be. Um, and there was a lot of pushback against this in the Wikipedia community. They weren't going to do it. They weren't going to help. There was one guy who actually started doing programming, Magnus Manske, German, and he actually has. I think he continues to work on Wikipedia today, and he's definitely one of the guys who helped get Wikipedia started. But basically, without any sort of support, without any funding, and I was having to, obviously, I was starting to teach philosophy again in order to pay the bills. I didn't really have a lot of time to organize a new project just as a volunteer. So basically, that idea withered. Jimmy Wales did not want to sell Nupedia to me. He didn't want to. He didn't support particularly this. I don't know that he opposed it, but opposing things is not what he does. He just fails to support them. And so, yeah. And so that never happened. A review process never happened. And so Wikipedia just went on by itself. And then, yeah, it was from the beginning, it was not designed to be a project that would work by itself. And even now, I think there's some substantive elements missing to Wikipedia.
So initially there was supposed to be an editorial review of the content that was finally approved to be accepted as an article.
Well,
However,
that was our plan anyway, yeah.
And right now, Wikipedia claims to be an intermediary, which means that it's just a website where users are generating content. At least that's the impression I got from Mr. Wales, that users are generating content and we essentially have nothing to do with it. So, and we have processes set where a consensus is built before a page and information on that page is approved. Now, my issue with that process of consensus, from what I have noticed, is that, for example, if there is a page about me, I have absolutely no say in what goes on, in that page. Anybody can create that page.
In
And if
fact,
somebody,
if you attempt to edit your page, you will be banned. If you go to the talk page and talk too much, especially in anything resembling a disrespectful or critical tone, you can easily be banned.
Which has happened to a lot of people in India anyway, which has been the major concern. So the setup right now is that if a person has X number of years of editing Wikipedia, they get to override anybody who raises a concern about the quality of content or the neutrality of content.
Yeah, it isn't precisely based on seniority, but it's related to seniority. I mean, if you're an admin or if you just have a lot of pull because you're popular, because you have the right views and you stroke the right backs and whatever, if you are sort of in the in crowd, then you have a lot more authority in the system. It's mob rule, and it has been basically since I left. Although it's become more organized in various ways, there is a veneer of bureaucracy. In fact, a veneer of rather strict bureaucracy, a strict seeming bureaucracy, but it's a set of rules and a set of functions that are applied in a essentially arbitrary way. Arbitrary in the sense that, I mean, you can detect a pattern, but it's a political pattern mostly. It's not a principled pattern.
So I'm trying to understand here, where does Wikipedia as a company step into the editorial or content process? Is Wikipedia as a company or its functionaries who are directly involved with Wikipedia at all involved at any stage as far as the content is concerned?
There is no Wikipedia company. It's not for profit. It's non-profit. So I guess you can call a non-profit a company. The company's name is the Wikimedia Foundation, located in San Francisco. They moved around in the early years, but they officially, I don't know what it is like unofficially these days, but officially, they don't take any responsibility except for certain legal issues that the foundation might have some liability. You know, if it puts them at some sort of legal liability, then they'll put their foot down. But otherwise, you know, they don't take any responsibility for the responsibility that the reliability, the morality of the information on the site. They do pay for quite a few people to work on the wiki through like special grants. Like when people give money to Wikipedia, they actually need a fraction of what they collect in order to just keep the servers running and to pay for technical maintenance and development. Most of what they pay for is like administration and legal and a lot of paid editing. But you know, in other words, someone will like contribute to support a bunch of articles about museums and the holdings of museums and archives. So there's actually been a lot of perfectly useful work being done. So they do that, but those people, I don't know. I can't tell you if those people have any sort of special rights. I don't think they do. I think they might have some clout if they're actually hired and being paid through the foundation. They might have some special clout. They probably couldn't get those jobs if they didn't already have clout in Wikipedia. Yeah. So. Right.
So let me get back to what you said. You said that the Wikimedia needs only a fraction of the money that they get through donations to keep Wikipedia up and running. So why are these elaborate donation campaigns organized, where even recently Wikipedia was asking people in India to contribute 75 rupees each, and I'm guessing in every country the amount is different, of course, but it was an elaborate donation campaign. So what happens to all that money that they collect, and why are they doing it if they need only a fraction of it to keep Wikipedia running?
Wikipedia has professional fundraisers behind it, and they are just doing their job. They're trying to get as much money as they possibly can for the organization because they do that. The organization isn't restraining them. In fact, the organization seems to be encouraging them to raise as much money as possible. Why they are trying to raise a lot of money? Well, it's whatever the board can imagine doing with it. So yeah, it's always bothered me a little bit, but I can't fault them for trying to raise money.
Of course.
Right? I mean, it's just I wish they could spend it in more sensible ways, like they could be adding all kinds of new really useful software features and like a review process, a feedback system for the public that does not require the public to actually interact with these insane Wikipedians. That would be a start.
So it has bothered you that they have these elaborate fundraising campaigns and only a fraction in the name of Wikipedia and in the name of keeping Wikipedia running, but a majority of the money is actually used elsewhere and not on Wikipedia. And they run these donation campaigns on top of official fundraising campaigns that they have behind the scenes.
Yeah, and they're also getting gobs of money from big corporations now, like Google. And you have to wonder what Google is getting for its money. Based on what we know about Google now, one thinks that it is not merely um, uh, enhancing their reputation as a philanthropic source. Um, and yeah, I would really like to have a really fair, in-depth analysis, a probing, actually old-fashioned journalistic analysis of what is going on with the spending that the Wikimedia Foundation does. So anyway, yeah,
So,
I can't say much more than that
yeah,
on that.
I understand. So, so you have gone on record to say that Wikipedia does have a severely left bias.
Yeah.
So, do you think, and if you can, of course, refuse to answer this question because it is in the realm of speculation, but we wonder what Google is getting in return while investing in Wikipedia
Hmm.
when almost all universities across the world refuse to even acknowledge Wikipedia as an authentic source of information. In fact, any genuine researcher, any genuine person who's trying to look for sources of information is not going to consider Wikipedia as one of them. So when you think about Google pumping in all this money into Wikimedia to
Yeah.
keep Wikipedia running, do you think it has a political undertone as far as keeping the left, information which is skewed towards the left going and ensuring that that is one of the first things people read when they try and look for information?
Could be. Um, I don't know that. I mean, I don't have any specific information that indicates that donations are, from left-leaning corporations and nonprofits are are tied to a requirement of bias, and look. Leftists will invade open organizations and subvert them systematically. That's just what they do. I do think that a lot of that activity is organized, right? And I think it might have been organized fairly early on in Wikipedia, based on just well, I won't say what it's based on, but it's very it is very striking to me anyway, just how decided that um, I'm
Since Wikimedia, the money that Wikimedia is collecting in terms of fundraising is
Mhm.
not all going towards keeping Wikipedia running, and
Yeah.
since entity like Google is
Mm.
donating heavily to Wikipedia to keep Wikipedia running,
Mhm.
and since we have you on record saying that Wikipedia does have a stated left bias, a,
Mhm.
a slant towards the left as far as its information is concerned. Do you think that there are political undertones as far as the relationship between Google and Wikipedia is concerned? Because today, if you search something, that's the first thing you read. You read a Wikipedia entry, which invariably has a left slant.
Right. Um, I I don't want to accuse Google of somehow causing Wikipedia to have a left-wing bias. Um, that's what you're suggesting, and it could be, but I don't have any specific evidence to that effect. Um, I think that basically the left tends to invade open institutions. I mean, it's been their modus operandi for the last 100 years. Basically invading open institutions, subverting them, dominating them as much as they can, and freezing out anyone who dissents from their views. So I can't tell you what the cause of the bias on Wikipedia is. I can only tell you that it's really obvious now. It used to be quite obvious, like even 10 years ago. It was already pretty obvious 10 years ago. Now it's just embarrassing. And it's just back in like 2005, basically between 2001 and 2005, 2006, it actually really, most articles made a concerted effort to be fair, to actually state a lot of different points of view quite fairly. And it was unusual in that regard. It was, for refreshing. It was one of the few places where you could get minority points of view on everything. And here I'm not just talking about politics. I'm talking about, religion and science and everything that it's possible to have heated disputes over, which is everything. Now there's an official view about pretty much everything. And because, they're objective, they're trying to go where the evidence leads, of course. But of course, that's just in one narrow group's opinion. So they've become extremely provincial. Although on the other hand, they've also become more globalist, because that really is the bias that they now reflect is that of the globalist left, and of the establishment with a capital E. So does the establishment make this happen by paying the Wikimedia Foundation? I don't know why the establishment, why those nonprofits and corporations give Wikipedia as much money as they do. Maybe, but I wouldn't claim to know how the money is dispersed or what the mechanisms are. So I wouldn't make that accusation. I actually think that the mechanisms just of people acting like jerks and driving off decent people who want a neutral reference, that's enough to explain the bias. Over the years, just more and more of those sorts of aggressively partisan people have come to dominate. So,
one other problem with online mobs, which I think rule Wikipedia, because I don't think there is any official interference as far as the content is concerned, as you said, but there is also no official restraint. There is no official policy that requires the content to be neutral or steps in when there is clearly the website going to the dogs. So it is run by an online digital mob that will just run the website as it deems fits. Is that what you're trying to say? That it's just a free for all where, digital blobs, faceless, entities can decide what people read about anything at all in the world?
pretty much. That's pretty much how it works. I do think that it's more than just a mob now. It's a mob in the sense that there is there is real internal political authority being wielded and no regularized, fair, democratic way of determining who should have that authority. Like the arbitration committee elections are a joke, right? You cannot know cannot announce or reveal the identities of a lot, like most of the administrators on Wikipedia. So, right. How did I
Why is
get to
that? I didn't really understand that. Why, what is this deal with not being able to talk about the identities of the admins?
Well, it matters because those are the people who uh, have the power, right? The admins, they have the official power in the system. They're the ones who can do things like block people and delete articles, for example. Um, that's important authority for sure. There's other people who have authority who might not be admins just because of like their personal influence in the system. Um, but anyway, you don't know who those people are. If you don't know who those people are, there is no accountability, right? The only sort of accountability there is within the system itself. So it's a self-contained system. You cannot, for example, if it were if it just so happened that one of the leading administrators, and I actually think this is probably the case, one of the leading administrators on Wikipedia is a convicted pedophile sitting in prison right now. And, you know, at some prison where they let the prisoners use the internet. There are such places. Um, well, that doesn't make any difference because there's no way of finding that out, right? That bothers me. Now, that isn't the thing that makes it a mob. The thing that makes it a mob is the combination of a lack of a fair democratic process for determining who those in charge will be, and just the lack of a fair application of the rules. There is no rule of law in Wikipedia. They certainly try to make it look like that because they're constantly, citing these, this alphabet soup of acronyms at you, which are basically short for different policies. But the way that the policies are implied or applied rather is it's absolutely, it's arbitrary, you know. So, all right, that's all background. Can you just repeat your question now?
So I was trying to ask you, let's just go to an offshoot of what you've said right now.
Okay.
Why would Jimmy Wales not want to fix this dysfunctional, almost incestuous, uh, you know, soup of crap that Wikipedia has now become? Why would Jimmy Wales not want to fix this?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that Jimmy Wales personally could fix it, even if he wanted to. However, I think he probably doesn't want to, for maybe a couple of reasons. One is ideological. He's a follower of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, which is it's radically libertarian. I don't think there's anything wrong with libertarianism. I'm a libertarian myself, to a great extent. I guess I'm more of a conservatarian these days. But he basically takes the view that, whatever system organically develops, and I don't pretend to speak for him. You might disagree with this characterization, but I think it's correct. Whatever sort of organically develops, as long as the majority of the people there support it, and the whole thing seems to be, going along like gangbusters, he's not going to oppose it at all. It doesn't matter what sort of bias he has. I think ultimately, Jimmy Wales, well, it's interesting back in the mid 1990s, Jimmy Wales would be difficult to distinguish from a conservative. He was, again, a follower of Ayn Rand, but he was not a leftist, not in any way, shape, or form. And now, like, wow. I mean, just look at the people he hangs with and the causes that he endorses and the way that he basically falls in line with whatever the establishment seems to ask of him. You know, I have to say that, well, to that extent, maybe it was never political, right? That, yeah. I don't claim to understand his motives. I'm just drawing inferences based on his behavior.
Yeah. Do you think Wikipedia is conceptually a product, an example of the O'Sullivan's Law, where if it's anything but stated right, over time it will become left? So do you think Wikipedia is an example? I said, do you think Wikipedia is an example of the O'Sullivan's Law in action, where if a website or something is not explicitly right, it's
Yeah,
going to over time become left?
yeah. It is like the poster child for that law. It is the prototype of how that happens. And I I really want to know. I don't know that I will ever know or that anyone will ever know for sure. But I think there were machinations going on even when I was there. Just looking back, the now that I think I understand the left better than I did 20 years ago. And then I just thought, like, the New York Times, they're okay, so they lean left, but they're okay, and they like have very good editors and so forth. And they wrote an article. They wrote one of the first two articles written by anybody about Wikipedia in the press outside of blogs. The other one was written by the MIT Technology Review. Wow, that's like one of the biggest tech journals, or it was, back in at the end of 2001. And here are these like bastions of the establishment saying, hey, these are worth supporting. I think clearly Wikipedia got on the radar of some influential people very early on. And then basically around that same time, things started getting a lot more difficult for people who just wanted to build a neutral encyclopedia like me. So, and a lot of us were essentially forced out. I doubt there's a single person who would own up to being a conservative. I'd be amazed, actually, if you could find a single one who spends very much time on Wikipedia. There might be some people who have accounts, who are conservative, that occasionally show up and make a few edits, but they keep their heads down and so forth. But anyone who is openly conservative and who make edits that attempt to balance the bias that is obvious in articles. Yeah, I'd be amazed if you could find one at this point.
Oh, there were a few. There were a few, and when they tried to make those edits, they were promptly banned from Wikipedia.
Right. I'm not denying that. Sure, of course that happens.
They were immediately banned, and all their edits were reverted. So it went back to being just as biased as it was before. In fact, when I wrote an article about why one of the articles were biased on Wikipedia, and I wrote about who were the players and who were the editors and admins who were, locking the page and ensuring that anybody who tries to make it neutral were banned.
Hmm.
They banned my website from being, they blacklisted my website altogether. so,
Yes.
so
Yes,
now
they're
my
very petty that
website,
way.
sorry?
They're very petty.
Yeah.
They're very petty that way. Yeah, they have no class. It's what can I say? I've been talking about this sort of thing for a long time, but it's gotten worse. It really has. It's which is actually, frankly, a good thing, right? They were able to get by with a reasonably good reputation by more or less behaving themselves for, I don't know, 10 years. But then, between 2015 and now, they made a steep decline in terms of how biased they were, and also in terms of, at least as everyone seems to be telling me now, just how closed as a community it is. They don't even make claims anymore that we are the encyclopedia anybody can edit, or that we're radically open, or any of the sorts of things that I used to say in about Wikipedia. I still think that there is room for wiki encyclopedias that are open that way, but you have to think a lot more um, about governance. That's the big problem. And actually, I should mention, I'm coming out with a book soon called Essays on Free Knowledge. And this is actually one of the themes of several of the essays, the importance of governance, and that Wikipedia, by um, essentially not having a regularized sort of charter that really makes sense, um, that it has really suffered as a result. So, and now, okay, the pigeons are coming home to roost. That's the point. Now they've squandered a lot of the goodwill that they've had. Um, Certainly, conservatives all around the world cannot, take Wikipedia seriously anymore. And even I think the left has to realize also that, you know, there's a certain kind of appeal that comes from having a reputation of neutrality, and they do not have that. Um, if you are known as a partisan source, then even um, among people who tend to the left, the liberals, like the more old-fashioned liberals, you're not going to be, you know, you're not going to be cited as much. You're not going to be taken as seriously. You're not going to be used or recommended as much. And that this could be, I don't know, but this could be why Wikipedia has been going down in the Alexa.com rankings of websites. According to their own statistics, they have been flat. I don't know if we can really trust their own statistics at this point, given all of the shady things that we know about them at this point. So, and this is, by the way, all of this about the internal politics of Wikipedia is not even to go into another whole aspect of that, which is that if you think about it, if it's a top 10 website, it isn't anymore. But if it's a really influential website, then of course, especially if it's open and it just takes a certain amount of time and analysis to figure out how the game is played, then, corporate PR is going to move in and influential nonprofits with political agendas are going to move in. Political parties are going to move in. Spies are going to move in for sure, right? Because that's what they do. I mean, a large part of military and spy operations today all around the world actually involve trying to influence opinion. So of course they're on Wikipedia. And isn't it convenient that we can't identify who they are? Certainly is convenient for them.
So I think what you're saying is that without any sort of editorial control, Wikipedia is going to keep slipping further and further and further. So,
Probably.
you've been, yeah. So, what do you see as, where do you see Wikipedia 10 years from now? If the trend continues, because, I don't see any institutional effort or intention to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, where do you see Wikipedia going 10 years from now?
Um, yeah, it's in 10 years, somebody is going to quote this and tell me that I'm either right or wrong. But I don't care. I'll go out on a limb and make a prediction. I actually think Wikipedia is um, going to continue its slide into obscurity. Um, I think that this isn't going to happen right away. It'll continue to slide slowly, replaced just with all of the rest of the internet. But I think it will eventually be replaced by, if not the Encyclosphere, as I'll explain, then something like it. So, or possibly a competitor, sure, like Everipedia. So I worked for Everipedia for a couple of years, and they're making some progress. Wikipedia doesn't need to be too worried about them yet, but that could change in the next 10 years for sure. Another very big possibility is just the superset of all encyclopedias, basically taken as a whole, made searchable as part of a network of encyclopedias. That could ultimately be much more common to cite than Wikipedia, much more common to refer to. So what I'm referring to now is the Encyclosphere. So just think of the blogosphere as being made up of all the different blogs in the world. And what makes it a blogosphere, like a circle of blogs, is that they all use the same protocols, standards, technical specification. The RSS standard is one of them. The Atom standard is another. And if you just set up a WordPress blog, then you will see there's a feed, it's an Atom feed. And I think they also have a RSS feed there too. Yeah, so, and that is allowed, that has allowed the form of blogging to proliferate independently of any particular software or any particular website. Now, WordPress dominates in terms of the software, but they're not the only blogging software. There are some people who just have their own bespoke blogging software, which is cool. And then they, set it up to publish using RSS, and they're part of the blogosphere. They can be. Similarly, there's lots of competitors of WordPress.com, which is the biggest blogging site. So why am I talking about blogs here? Because the same thing could be happening with encyclopedias. Okay, instead of having a single owner, a single domain, a single narrow community, we all could be contributing to the world's encyclopedias. This is how Wikipedia was supposed to be in the beginning. That's what I wanted it to be. Jimmy Wales doesn't care that it is not that anymore. He clearly doesn't. I challenge him, actually. Answer this, Jimmy. Explain why you are comfortable with only a relatively narrow subsection of the populace basically being allowed to contribute to Wikipedia? I know the response. The response is going to be, of course they're allowed. You just need to play by the rules, etc. But of course that's bullshit, right? And we know it is. So what we need is a system in which people can contribute to the world's knowledge or purported knowledge on their own terms, right? And then what happens is once there's this big organized, distributed, decentralized database of encyclopedia articles living elsewhere, then there's what are called aggregators. So they go out and they put their tentacles out, they reach into all of these different feeds and they bring them together into one database. And then those databases can be used in what's your technical people know what I'm talking about, in an API. They can have an API which allows people to build apps on top of them. It works like a single database, even though it's distributed all across the world. There are similar aggregators for blogs.
So was that the relationship that you had envisioned between Nupedia and Wikipedia? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I had no idea about this sort of thing. I think there were a small number of people who might have, but I'm not so sure about even that. Now we understand, because basically the blogosphere showed the way, and it's not like blogs are the only kind of decentralized content. There's IRC, there's email. Email is decentralized content. You're not stuck with Gmail, for example. So in the end, what needs to exist, as I say, is a protocol that defines a standard for, or rather a specification that defines a standard for encyclopedia articles. Then tools for publishing feeds of encyclopedia articles, just like there are feeds of blog posts. And then aggregators that bring all the feeds together, and then apps written, which give you windows into, and they can be quite idiosyncratic. Like if you want to have a left-leaning app, feel free. You can choose the sources. If you want a completely neutral app, though, you could choose the sources. And then on top of all of that, I think there needs to be a rating system. But making that work, making it fully distributed is going to be hard, because it will require, in order to be fair in terms of what the ratings are, you're going to have to uniquely identify each person, one, one vote. And that requires that you solve the problem of digital identity in a way that isn't privacy invading. So that's hard. But just making the protocol, I think, it's within our grasp. We've actually started working on it on Encyclosphere.org, and we could use some more help. I haven't been working on that site lately because I've been having to pay the bills, but I do hope to get back to it soon. It's not going to go away,
So, when somebody has had a career spanning 30, 40, 50 years, or, there is an information bank regarding a certain subject which goes back centuries and centuries or decades, there is bound to be a healthy mix of positives and negatives. So, for example, if we look at you as an entity, I'm sure there are going to be X number of things which are negative, which can be written about you, and X number of things which are positive that can be written about you. And it's pretty much the same about every website, every individual, every professional, every subject. Now, when you started Wikipedia, had you put in a system in place where you defined the proportion that the editors must look into for the article to be completely fair? So was there a system in place where you ensured that if you're covering a subject, you need to cover positives and negatives in this certain proportion to be sure that the article is neutral.
Are you asking this about Wikipedia? Are you
Yeah,
asking?
Wikipedia,
Yeah.
about Wikipedia.
Um, there was never a system per se, and there certainly isn't now. There was a policy, okay, that was interpreted in frankly, a very loose sort of fashion. Maybe we should have come up with some sort of system. Knowing what we know now, I think I probably would have worked harder at that back when we were getting it started. But yeah, I mean, Wikipedians will point to their neutral point of view policy page. And then there are some supplementary pages there which actually do talk about something like a procedure. They don't follow anything that would have the result of what you're talking about. There is no way of checking articles for fairness and balance with regards to either public opinion or the broad scope of expert opinion. I actually always maintained that we needed to actually represent both public opinion and expert opinion within an article, specifying which is which, if as necessary, right? And so the problem is that Wikipedia has decided that they're not about neutrality at all. They continue to have a neutrality policy. This might change, by the way. They might actually just scrap neutrality because that's actually becoming a dirty word for the left, right? They don't want to be neutral. Neutral about the facts? No, we're pro facts. We and of course they are the ones who decide what the facts are. They seem not to realize that it's possible to dispute about what the facts are, as if they were in all cases absolutely obvious, and as if the people who didn't endorse the facts that they do are just dishonest and or crazy or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, there's no system in place now, and now Wikipedia actually has, if anything, well, if you look at the neutrality page, the neutral point of view policy page, it actually talks about false balance, what they call false balance, which is a canard of contemporary journalism since about 2000 or so, and especially in the last 10 years, according to which on some topics the facts are known, and if you actually try to let people make up their own minds for themselves by presenting one side and then another side in a balanced fashion, then you are committing the sin of false balance. Okay, and Wikipedia has absolutely abandoned the neutrality policy by endorsing that journalistic canard. Yeah,
So
it's a shame.
essentially, they've taken up the responsibility of telling the world what they should and should not believe, and what is true as an absolute term, and what is not as an absolute term. Now,
Not on
considering
every subject. I mean, we'll be fair here, right? They're not saying that about absolutely every subject. Basically, where the establishment recognizes a a, a legitimate dispute, for example, then they will recognize a legitimate dispute, right? So I'll give you an example. In the article about Jesus Christ, all right, I looked at it, and So I actually read the Bible through for the first time in my life, all the way through, beginning last December. And I was amazed at all these things I didn't know. And actually read some commentaries and stuff on the side. It's very interesting. Um, and I read the article about Jesus, and I was amazed that this represented only the point of view of basically academic liberals, of liberal theologians. Um, it is almost as if on many of the questions about Jesus and the life of Jesus and so forth, it's almost as if a traditional biblical based view of Jesus was just not included, right? And that, like it didn't even exist. So on the other hand, they were perfectly willing to talk about different points of view that were under active discussion in among liberal theologians. You see what I'm saying? But like including stuff from the the fiery Baptist preachers or whatever, that stuff might not just as well might not exist. So
It's actually interesting that the liberals who are doing this now are equally interested in sort of shielding the Islamists and jihadis on Wikipedia. That is one, strange conundrum that I've never been able to solve. That
mhm.
why would the liberals really align themselves with the jihadis? Because the liberal ideology is supposed to be traditionally completely an opposite to what the jihadis, represent. And on Wikipedia, we've seen very often that while other religions are sort of watered down or presented in a manner where which conforms with the liberal view of that religion. For example, Hinduism will be shown in a negative light because for the liberals, a polytheist religion like Hinduism probably represents something that they would want to demolish, while Islam, which is the representation of Islam is watered down to a level where you would probably sometimes wonder if violent Islam or jihadi activity even exists in the world. How would you explain this sort of strange, symbiotic relationship that the liberals seem to have with the jihadis?
That's a reflection of the alliance between the left and Islam in general. That it is not a feature of Wikipedia in particular, I would think. Um, you know, let's put it this way. In American politics, and a lot of it seems to be driven by, well, American and European politics. Basically, whoever is or whatever is the regarded as like the most aggressive enemy of conservatives and of Christians and libertarians, those become allies to the left. So back in the 1990s, people didn't talk about Islam very much in the West at all. I mean, yes, we talked about terrorism. Yes, the Palestinian Israeli conflict was certainly a big part of politics, sure, but it didn't dominate in the way that it does now. And the there weren't nearly as many Muslims living in Europe, for example. Then 9/11 happened, and there were like new battle lines drawn, it seemed. Cultural battle lines, of course, and also real battle lines in the ongoing, Cold War against Islam or against Christianity or the West or whatever is going on, however you want to describe it. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not an expert on this stuff. All I can say is how it seems to me, and there does seem to be now a great desire to support Islam at every turn, because it's politically correct to do so. And as near as I can make out, the reason that it's politically correct to do that, as opposed to supporting Hindus or Buddhists or whatever, or, well, Jews for that matter, is that Islam is at war with the West. The left is at war with the West, and so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I'm just a philosopher and a technologist, so for what it's worth.
Right. So, a biased page on Wikipedia, which leaves out a lot of essential facts about an incident. Now, I promised you I wouldn't ask you about domestic politics. I'm not going to get into the details of what happened during the Delhi riots.
Okay.
But if you take me on face value, for example, and I tell you that a lot of essential facts of what happened during the Delhi riots were simply whitewashed and were not even mentioned on the Wikipedia page. Now, when a lot of people are going to Google the Delhi riots, for
Yeah.
example, somebody from the West Googles Delhi riots, the first result that they are going to read is Wikipedia. So
Yeah.
essentially, Wikipedia is, whether we like it or not, rewriting contemporary history as we go along.
Yeah.
Earlier,
I,
you mentioned that there would be spies and government officials and all sorts of dangerous players who would want to control the narrative by controlling the information put out on Wikipedia. My question to you is that now that it has entered a territory which is almost dangerous, do you recommend any sort of government intervention in different countries?
do I recommend government intervention in different countries? Oh, do you mean intervention into Wikipedia?
Yeah, so if, for example, the information about India is being skewed to a point where, it's completely distorted, it's
Yeah.
rewriting our contemporary history, and the majority population is being demonized to a
Yeah.
point where it's, entering dangerous territory, would you recommend that the government steps in?
Yeah, sorry, no, definitely not. And the reason is that's much more dangerous than having an out of control, currently popular reference work. Um, Basically, you do not want the government in control of propaganda. Okay, we've learned our lesson. Okay, didn't we learn that lesson from the 20th century? I hope so. Um, So yeah, that's not the answer. The government could talk back, but even that makes me worried. Um, in the same way that sometimes people get, the left anyway, and well-meaning liberals get worried when Trump talks back against journalists. It's like, whoa, dude, that's sounding very close to censorship, right? Now, I don't think actually Trump is going to engage in censorship um, of the press that hates him so much. But I can understand why liberals are alarmed when Trump attacks the press. So even if the government were to speak out, loudly and forcefully against misrepresentations of well-known facts. Of course, people disagree about what the facts are, don't they? Then that is going to alarm a lot of people. And, generally the left is going to they're going to go as far as the other side is going to go, and then they're going to take it a step farther. So just don't encourage the government to get involved in censorship, because it's not going to go well. That's my general view. If the government wanted to do anything, they could support a neutral network like I'm talking about. But even that, like the Knowledge Standards Foundation, which is the organization that I'm starting up to support, the Encyclosphere project, we are going to refuse money. I don't care how generous it is. We're going to refuse any money from governments, and also from big corporations, because it's just too risky. Knowledge is extremely powerful, right? And if you give organized, real political/military power control over knowledge, it's disastrous. And that's what the left ultimately wants. You think if they get into total power, they're going to allow freedom of the press? They never do, right? At least not when they not when they enjoy a real hegemony, like in China and formerly Russia and Eastern Europe. There was no free press there, and that it will be shut down if they take over. So don't allow them to take over by making your own press less free. So, and that unfortunately includes Wikipedia. It's part of the free press. Got to protect it.
So, what steps would you recommend to deal with this issue that seems to be just getting bigger and bigger and bigger with no end in sight? For right now, there
Yeah.
are people who really want to affect change, at least in India. And I
Yeah.
know this because I am in constant touch with them and in constant conversation with people who are trying to fix Wikipedia
Yeah.
and are failing absolutely miserably. It's almost depressing to watch people try and fail. So, how
Yeah.
do we go about fixing this problem?
Yeah, you're not going to be able to fix the problem head on by actually trying to edit Wikipedia and going head to head on their own terms, because the game has already been fixed, and they are highly motivated and probably paid a lot of money altogether to make it read the way it's reading right now. There's a lot of money involved. You better and a lot of power and people who care about how articles read there, and they dominate the proceedings. You're not going to be able to beat them on their own turf. So one thing that I would recommend that your viewers and listeners do is go to Everpedia. I don't know if the guys there would actually approve of my recommending that you write articles about India on Everpedia, but just try it and write, edit the article about the Delhi riots there. That'd be really interesting. If you do that, like once it's developed, give me a link to it, and I would be curious to see how the article then differs from the Wikipedia article. And then another thing to do is, and I'm sorry. I mean, at this point, the reason I'm not working on the Encyclosphere, to be quite honest, is that I'm a middle class guy living in central Ohio. in flyover country in the United States. Flyover country, if you've heard of that, it's just like the areas between the coasts that the sophisticated people ignore. So that's where I am, quite deliberately. I'd be making more money if I were to have joined some corporation in San Francisco or Boston or whatever. I could have done that. I deliberately decided not to. It's just that is not what I'm into. So if I guess what I'm saying is I'm kind of apologizing. I wish I had the time to organize the resistance, which is basically what the Encyclosphere project is, but I need the funding for it. And like I say, I'm not going to go through the usual avenues. It's going to have to be crowdsourced. And crowdsourcing itself is a major job. And I've got other things that I'm doing now. So yeah, I think it's going to happen, right? The money is going to arrive one way or another. Some supporters out there, and then the Encyclosphere is going to take off. I actually think that the way to do it right now, and this is something that some of your technical viewers might do, getting together, you could do it via the Encyclosphere. Just start talking to each other on the Encyclosphere Slack group, please. That would be great. But basically, you just start making the software, making the standards for the Encyclosphere, and then once they're developed well enough, we'll be able to republish all of Wikipedia using these encyclopedia standards, and also every other encyclopedia in the world. If they're proprietary encyclopedias, then we'll just have the metadata about them. In other words, the data about the articles without the content of the articles, right? And then this is what really needs to happen. Somebody needs to make a great WordPress plugin that, like, you install the plugin, you write a page and press a button, and then it is submitted. Maybe what happens first is you press a button in order to start a certain kind of page, and then you fill in a form, essentially, that has a nice editing form for an encyclopedia article. Then when you save it, it is actually published in your own encyclopedia feed. And then we need people to go and make apps that will scoop up all of those different articles. Here's a good place to start for the developers out there. Nobody has done this yet. Okay, this is like one of the first things that we need to do, just sort of experimentally. We need to create a meta search engine of all encyclopedias. There used to be these things, right? And there might still be some that use Google, but I'm not aware of any that actually go in and deep link the articles, that builds its own database of all the articles in, well, let's begin with Wikipedia, then the Everipedia articles that are not in Wikipedia, they're added, and then Britannica and the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and on and on and on. You just get all of those different sources in a single resource and make it the place to search for encyclopedia articles. And then, I'm not saying that app is going to end up being more popular than Wikipedia. It won't. It'd have to evolve a great deal, and it definitely needs a rating system. But I think that's the direction we need to move in. So it's going to be a lot of hard work. I can tell you that. it's not going to be easy to solve this problem. You can't work within the Wikipedia system. You have to replace it. So, and yeah.
Even if, let's assume that in the next 5, 10 years, 6 years, this entire system that you have explained takes off,
Mhm.
you still have the problem of companies like Google
Yeah.
mothering Wikipedia. So even if you have a system that can replace Wikipedia, do you think corporates like Google, which are, mothering left bias as of now, as of today, are going to allow such a system to thrive and such a system to become more popular than Wikipedia, even if it has the potential?
Well, no, I doubt that Google would do that. If another system actually um, allowed other non-establishment points of view to have a significant say in the public arena, then Google is not going to support it. But then, there's a movement also not to support Google. The best thing that we can do basically is to supply alternatives and make them better and better and better. That's the only thing we can do. You can try to use the blunt instrument of the law, but that's what the left wants. So you start doing that, they are going to use it in the way they want to. They won't just, they'll shut down the alternatives if they get into power, right? So yeah, it's we
So
don't have
you
any
believe
choice.
you can't defeat the anarchists with the law, is what you're trying to say.
I'm saying the anarchists want control over the levers of power, and they will get them if they're not stopped in the political arena. But as long as we're just talking about writing encyclopedias, um, then I mean, yeah, you cannot beat the Wikipedia people at their own game. I mean, God bless you if you want to try. Okay, go ahead, try. That'd be great. Um, but at this point, I can predict you're not going to have much luck. I'll tell you this: if you come up with an app that provides a decentralized um, platform for or a decentralized network, a window into a truly decentralized network, not just one that you call decentralized, but that really is decentralized because it's based on a neutral technical standard. If you have an app that provides a window into that, I will support you with my voice, and that will get you a lot of support, believe me. Because if I start coming out and start talking a lot about your app, which is um, you know the first great app of the new Encyclosphere, because there's going to be a lot more than just one app on for the Encyclosphere, then that's news. That's news even independent of what I say. But if I, people in the tech world, they know me to a certain extent. Not everybody for sure, but a lot of them do. And a lot of reporters certainly know about me. They've been writing about me and my projects for 20 years now. And if I come out very loudly, repeatedly endorsing some project, then it will make it into the news. Especially if I say this isn't just an experimental thing, just in the early stages, but it's well developed. So yeah, I mean, by all means, just get involved and get it started. I myself, I kind of want to stay independent of a lot of these things if I can. I don't want to recreate the problem that I created with Wikipedia by associating myself with any one app. But if you've got an app that does the things that I have outlined in the essays that I've written about the Encyclosphere, and you can go to encyclosphere.org, then heck yeah, I'll support it. I will talk about it. I will come on like your podcast and talk about it, or anybody's. I don't care if it's made by an Indian company at all. I think actually might be better. Maybe you would be, less apt to be dominated by corrupt Western attitudes. Who knows? There's corruption everywhere, I know. So anyway.
The left is actually beginning to mirror the West in India. So
Yeah.
even in India, we have this parasitic, never-ending problem. It's a problem which you imagine that if there is an apocalypse, only that problem is going to survive because they're like cockroaches. They just refuse to die down. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of corruption in the West, and there's a lot of liberal distortion in the West. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we are inching towards a place where India is no better as far as the liberal infestation is concerned. And we are far worse as far as the jihadi infestation is concerned. So,
Yeah.
let's hope there are going to be a lot of people who would listen to your call and put their heads together. I am a complete tech illiterate. So, all of that just goes straight over my head. But I hope people who listen to you and listen to this podcast can come up with an idea and a workable solution because it is actually a little disheartening when you say that there is absolutely no way you can fight Wikipedia from within anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a problem which is here to stay till we find an alternative.
Right. Until we make a better alternative, frankly. Because, the average person doesn't care about like the politics of this stuff, and they just want their questions answered for the most part. Even when I'm interacting with the internet to get a question answered, I don't think too much about the politics. I just want my question answered. Of course, I'm aware of it. I have to think about it. That's just an annoyance. It isn't my focus, and that's definitely the case with most people. Most people, they just want the best available, and Wikipedia looks impressive. It's like very long articles, lots of pictures, footnotes. It must be reliable. So anyway.
So thank you so much. I think we finally understood why Wikipedia is as messed up as it is. And unfortunately, we've also understood that there is absolutely nothing much we can do about it till an alternative presents itself.
Right. I'm afraid you're right. I can't think of anything else to be done within. I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I don't think there's anything that you can do within the Wikipedia system, right? There's just too much money and too many people, entrenched interests, and just personally entrenched people who are, want to keep it the way it is. So you're not gonna be able to change it. You can embarrass them, you can try, but these people are shameless.
No, Larry,
So
I tried the shame route, and it just didn't work because
yeah,
I had a spat on Twitter, and then Jimmy Wales messaged me privately and said, here's my email address. Please email me the evidence and the problem, and I'm your ally, and I'm going to help you fix the problem,
it's
and
not
I'm
your ally.
sure all of
He's not
you.
your ally.
And I spent an
He
entire
doesn't
day
care.
sending him a
He
long
doesn't care
email.
at all. He
No,
doesn't
nothing
care at
happened.
all.
Nothing happened.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing at all happened. Even
I'll
after
tell
I
you one
sent him a
last
5,000 word email.
I'll tell you one last story.
Yeah.
And this is okay. back in 2010, I was talking on a education mailing list. And the teachers there were talking about how they use Wikipedia. And I said, you should not be using or recommending Wikipedia. There's all kinds of junk there. There's like pornography. And then I decided, I looked up child pornography on Wikipedia. And yes, they had graphic depictions of children being abused. They were drawings, right? And they had a number of photos of nude little girls on Wikipedia. And I was shocked. I looked up the law, and it required me to report the website. And I said, oh my gosh, well, if I sort of like let it be known, as I had on the mailing list, that Wikipedia had these drawn depictions of child abuse, then I needed to report it. I mean, this is basically, otherwise I myself could be prosecuted potentially. Of course, I now know that that would never have happened. But at any rate, so I did. I reported it publicly in order to motivate Wikipedia to change. So Jimmy Wales, interestingly, responded to this by going in and starting to like delete things. And it's not just this episode, but then a later episode in which I said Wikipedia has all kinds of pornography on it, a lot of X-rated stuff. And it's on Wikipedia, and it's even more on the Wikimedia Commons, which is like pictures mostly. And Jimmy Wales went in and started deleting a lot of stuff, and then other people undeleted his work. Yeah. So yeah, you would think, doesn't this mean that he's actually maybe not such a bad guy? And then I started plugging for just a filter that was available, just like a filter is available on Google, right? That would filter out the images and so forth that you wouldn't want a child to see. And most people on Wikipedia were dead set against this. Jimmy Wales, to my surprise, I thought he was actually being decent. Maybe. He argued within the board in favor of such a filter. And they actually started a little project to have a child filter for Wikipedia. And then I never found out why this is the case. He changed his mind. And at the same time, everybody else on the board changed their minds. And then they were unanimous against such a filter. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, are you saying that they unanimously decided to not do anything about pornography, including child pornography, on Wikipedia after that point of time, after they changed their mind?
The pornography filter is the one that they changed their mind about. The child pornography thing was a little earlier. The pornography filter thing, I think it might have happened in the next year, in 2011. But they were related. They were like part of the same effort that I was making. And so I got them to respond, and Jimmy Wales, as I said, initially seemed to be on my side, and then just that was it. No more talk about that. Dead silence after that. Like somehow the orders had come from above. No, we're not going to do that. Or some influential person persuaded the whole board, including Jimmy Wales, to change their position. So and the board, you know, they got rid of some of the of what I would call child pornography, but the drawn child pornography, the stuff it's like 100 years old, but it wouldn't matter. It's just that bad and realistic and modern looking, frankly, except for maybe some of the costumes. You know, it's truly repulsive what I saw, and has no business being on Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons, but it was. And as far as I know, it's still there. So yeah, and they never did adopt a filter. So the moral of the story is Wikipedia cannot be shamed.
No, and if they're not willing to do something about something as debased, dangerous, and immoral as child pornography, I doubt they're going to care about the details of a riot. So that is my that is my understanding of this entire, talk. That there is absolutely no winning with the shameless, and
Yeah,
there is no winning with people who have big corporations and vested interests backing them and have a system where Wikipedia is meant to be as it is today, and it has absolutely no incentive to change, and it has no incentive to become credible.
right.
Right.
You've got it.
So thank you so much for speaking to us. I think all of us now have a better understanding of at least just how shameless Wikipedia is. So maybe we can focus our energies into something far more constructive.
I hope so. Absolutely. All
Thank you
right.
so much.
Yeah. Thank you.